I've got some troubling news about England's royal family.
The royal court had witnessed arguments before, but nothing prepared it for the moment Camilla turned toward Prince George and delivered an attack so personal, so cutting, that every conversation in the chamber died at once. The young heir stood frozen beneath the eyes of Britain's most powerful family. Then Charles rose from his chair. His face tightened, his hand struck the table, and the carefully controlled monarch disappeared before the entire court. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles had called the gathering to project unity, not expose a fracture. The royal court, meaning the family members and advisors gathered around the sovereign, had assembled to discuss how the younger generation would take on responsibility. William sat close to George, Catherine watched her son, and Princess Anne studied the room with the silence of someone who sensed danger before anyone named it. The king had announced that George would begin attending constitutional briefings under his father's supervision. These briefings were lessons explaining how the monarch works with government and carries out duty. Charles wanted the boy prepared without being crushed by expectation. William supported that path, while Catherine believed confidence had to grow before pressure hardened around him. Camilla broke the calm. She called Prince George too sheltered, too uncertain, and unprepared to carry the crown. Then she pushed further, saying the monarchy could not depend on an heir who needed his parents to answer difficult questions. She did not lower her voice. She aimed every word at the child while the court listened. George looked toward William but could not speak. His fingers tightened around the chair, and shame rose across his face as courtiers looked away. Catherine moved closer. She said nothing, yet her stillness carried anger. The Princess of Wales understood why the moment mattered. One sentence could become a wound the future king carried for years. Charles exploded. He drove his chair, struck the table, and ordered Camilla to stop. When the queen consort defended her words as necessary honesty, the monarch shouted that no one would humiliate his grandson in his presence. Anne noticed the folder beside Camilla's hand. Handwritten pages tracked George's confidence, reactions, and dependence on his parents. This was no sudden outburst. It had been prepared. Charles suspended the session and ordered her out. Camilla remained seated, then rose. William stayed behind, opened the abandoned folder, and found Catherine's name across the next page. The king's fury had ended the meeting, but William knew the attack on George was only the first strike in a much larger campaign. Behind the titles, uniforms, and ancient rules stood a frightened child, a furious father, a protective mother, and a king who understood that silence could become betrayal. Camilla's words had not merely questioned George's readiness. They had struck at William's parenting, Catherine's protection, and Charles's promise to prepare the next generation differently. Every person in that chamber had something to lose, but the youngest had been given the cruelest burden. George sat with Catherine in a quiet side room. The young prince had begun to understand what his future demanded. Constitutional briefings, meaning private lessons about how the monarch works with government and duty, had introduced him to expectations no child could carry. William and Catherine had slowed that process because they wanted responsibility to grow beside confidence, not replace it. George asked whether Camilla had been right. His voice stayed firm until the last word, then broke. Catherine knelt, took his hands, and told him that courage did not mean never feeling afraid. It meant moving forward without allowing fear to decide who he became. She repeated it until he looked at her again. William entered carrying the folder, but he hid it behind his back when he saw his son's face. The prince had believed the gathering would strengthen George. Instead, he had brought him into a room where an adult had turned private anxiety into public humiliation. William blamed himself for not seeing the danger before it reached the boy. Charles faced a different guilt. Alone in his study, the king removed his glasses and stared at his trembling hands. Princess Anne had warned him that arguments around George were becoming personal, yet he had invited Camilla into the discussion. The monarch had mistaken avoidance for peace, and his grandson had paid the price. William opened the folder. Page after page judged George's posture, speaking confidence, public reactions, and reliance on Catherine. Ordinary childhood habits were written as failures. The language did not sound protective. It sounded like a case being built. Catherine's name appeared across several pages. Camilla accused the Princess of Wales of creating an emotional barrier around the future king. The attack had never been aimed at George alone. It challenged the way William and his wife had chosen to raise him, and questioned who had the right to shape the next reign. Anne read one paragraph from the notes, set the page down, and went still. She told William she had heard those exact words during a private Balmoral conversation that should never have left the room. To understand the attack, the family would have to return to the moment quiet resentment became an open declaration of war. The attack at Windsor did not begin with a cruel sentence spoken before the royal court. It began months earlier in a small Balmoral drawing room, where 4 adults discussed George's future, while the young prince slept upstairs. One suggestion was rejected, one warning was ignored, and one person left the room convinced that the Wales family was building a monarchy in which she would have no voice, no legacy, and eventually no place. Charles wanted George prepared slowly. William supported constitutional education, meaning lessons about how a future monarch works with government and national duty. But he refused to let those lessons consume his son's childhood. Catherine insisted on ordinary routines and emotional stability. Camilla wanted stricter discipline, earlier scrutiny, and a formal system for judging every public appearance. Anne sensed the danger before the others did. She warned Charles in a private conversation that the disagreement was no longer about helping George. The Queen Consort had begun treating the boys' preparation as a contest over who would shape the next reign. The king listened, but he did not act. Camilla made her move during an evening meeting at Balmoral. She proposed appointing one of her trusted advisors to review George after every ceremony, speech, and public engagement. William rejected the idea at once. He told her that his son would not be placed under an unofficial surveillance system designed by someone outside the direct line of responsibility. Catherine closed the leather briefing book. Camilla had accused her of being too emotionally involved to judge George fairly, but the Princess of Wales did not raise her voice. "He is a child before he is an institution," she said. Then she stood and left without waiting for an answer. Camilla felt the rejection burn. Charles offered no defense, and Anne openly agreed with William. Although only 4 people remained around the table, the Queen Consort felt stripped of authority before the very family whose future she wanted to influence. Charles chose avoidance again. Later, when Camilla asked whether she had overstepped, the king advised everyone to let the tension cool. He never drew a boundary. His silence allowed her to believe the argument remained dangerously alive. Camilla acted that same night. Through a private instruction recorded by her aide, she ordered a confidential memorandum, meaning a written internal assessment, on George's readiness. It soon expanded into criticism of William, Catherine, and their entire approach. Anne now recognized the exact Balmoral language inside the Windsor folder. The attack had been planned. William looked at her and demanded a private meeting with Camilla before Charles could soften the consequences. This time, no child would stand between them. William did not shout when he entered the room. He did not threaten, accuse, or invoke his future crown. He simply placed Camilla's folder on the table, closed the door behind him, and asked one question. "Why did you choose my son?" In that instant, the Queen Consort understood that she was no longer dealing with a wounded parent reacting in public. She was facing the future king, and he had come for an answer. William had chosen the Windsor sitting room because privacy removed every shield. No aides waited nearby. No secretary could reshape the exchange. The household, meaning the staff and offices supporting senior royals, remained outside, so neither side could later hide behind procedure or competing accounts. Charles had not been told. The prince knew his father's instinct was to calm conflict before naming its cause, and that instinct had already failed George once. Protecting his son now required action before the king could turn a planned attack into another misunderstanding. William opened the folder and pushed it toward Camilla. He asked whether she had approved the words describing George as dependent, fragile, and unready for constitutional duty. She admitted she had, then argued that the monarchy could not survive if difficult truths were treated as cruelty. William gripped the chair behind him. His voice stayed low, but his anger sharpened every word. Real concern, he said, would have been brought privately to him and Catherine. It would not have been aimed at a child before the court to create pressure. Camilla refused to retreat. She accused William and his wife of building a protected circle around George that excluded anyone they distrusted. The Queen Consort said the prince treated her like a temporary figure whose voice would vanish the moment Charles was gone. William asked why she needed witnesses. Camilla answered through recorded minutes later preserved by a palace secretary. Her warnings had been ignored, so she chose the court to force senior figures to listen before the Wales household could silence her. The truth landed hard. George had been used as leverage. Camilla had wounded the youngest person in the room to provoke a battle over her influence. She reached for the folder. William covered it with his hand and said the papers were no longer hers to control. Every copy would be reviewed, and every aide involved identified. The door handle moved. Charles entered, saw his wife standing across from his son, and understood fully that the argument had become a test of royal authority. William had exposed the motive. Now the king had to choose between protecting Camilla and proving that even the queen consort could be held accountable. For most of his life, Charles had fought to keep love and duty from destroying one another. Now they stood on opposite sides of a closed Windsor room. His wife demanded protection. His son demanded accountability. His grandson waited elsewhere, wondering whether the attack had revealed what the family truly believed about him. The king possessed the highest authority in the palace, yet every option before him required a betrayal, and everyone watched to see whom he would sacrifice. Charles alone could decide what happened next. As sovereign, meaning the reigning monarch with final authority over the royal household, he controlled Camilla's access to briefings and ceremonial planning. William might inherit the crown someday, but only his father could impose restrictions now. The stakes reached far beyond one argument. Removing Camilla from discussions about George would prove that her public rank did not give her power over the succession. Refusing to act would send a darker message. The dignity of the young heir could be damaged without consequence. Charles carried the memorandum into his study and read every page. The document, meaning a written internal assessment, questioned George's confidence and dependence on Catherine. When the king reached a passage describing the boy as fragile, he removed his glasses, folded them carefully, and placed them on the desk. Camilla entered without invitation. She reminded Charles of the years they had survived public condemnation together. The queen consort said he had promised never to abandon her when pressure became unbearable. Then she asked whether William was now being allowed to erase her place beside him. Charles did not look away. He told her this was not about public approval or loyalty to their marriage. It was about a child who had trusted the adults in that room. Whatever anger she carried, George could never be used to settle it. Anne arrived with messages preserved by staff. They showed that 2 members of Camilla's office had circulated the assessment before the gathering. The princess explained that several courtiers had received passages, proving the document was meant to influence the room. Charles signed an internal directive removing his wife from all meetings concerning George, the Wales children, and succession planning. Her ceremonial position remained, but her access ended immediately. He set the pen across the page and informed William in private. The prince showed no triumph. He asked only whether George would be told that his grandfather had defended him. The answer divided the palace. Some saw justice. Others saw a marriage under siege. Camilla's allies began resisting, and the signature sent a shockwave through every corridor where loyalty to the crown and loyalty to her could no longer coexist. By sunrise, no public announcement had been issued, yet the palace already felt transformed. Doors that had once opened for Camilla now required permission. Briefing folders stopped arriving. Conversations ended when she approached. The restriction was private, but its meaning was unmistakable. Charles had chosen the protection of George over the influence of his wife. For the queen consort, the punishment was not a dramatic removal. It was the quiet discovery that the institution had begun moving without her. Camilla asked for the folder normally placed beside her tea. The aide paused, then explained that her name had been removed from the distribution list, meaning the official record of who receives sensitive papers. Future succession briefings would go only to Charles, William, Catherine, and approved constitutional advisors. The palace divided without raising its voice. Long-serving courtiers accepted the king's instruction, while members of Camilla's office called it excessive. The royal household, meaning the separate teams serving senior family members, still had to present unity outside, even as suspicion hardened behind closed doors. Camilla lowered her cup and never lifted it again. She had expected anger, bargaining, perhaps another confrontation with Charles. Instead, she met silence. No one challenged the monarch, and the absence of resistance made her loss of influence feel permanent. George heard enough to believe he had caused it. He asked William whether his grandfather and Camilla were fighting because of him. The prince knelt beside his son and answered carefully. Responsibility belonged to the person who chose to cause harm, never to the one who was harmed. Anne soon found a deeper threat. Palace staff recorded that one of Camilla's advisors had tried to retrieve draft copies of the assessment from an internal archive, the secure system where official papers are stored. The princess ordered every version sealed before anything could disappear. Catherine read the recovered drafts. One proposal demanded that George's public schedule be expanded, without parental approval, to correct emotional dependency. She read the sentence twice, closed the file, and asked to see Charles immediately. Charles reacted without hesitation. After hearing Catherine's account and examining the document himself, the king cancelled his scheduled meeting with Camilla. She waited in the adjoining room until an equerry, a royal officer who manages formal duties, informed her that the monarch would not receive her that evening. George then surprised them all. He told Catherine that he wanted to speak with Charles alone. The adults had argued over his future, judged his strength, and made decisions around him. Now he wanted his own voice heard. The crisis had been created by adults, but everything would change when George entered his grandfather's study completely alone. There were no courtiers in the room, no advisors taking notes, and no parents choosing careful words on George's behalf. There was only a grandfather behind a desk, and a boy standing before him, carrying the weight of a crown he had never requested. Charles expected tears, anger, or a plea for protection. Instead, the young prince asked him to make one promise, one that would force the king to reconsider not only Camilla's punishment, but the kind of monarchy he intended to leave behind. George asked William and Catherine to wait outside the study. Both hesitated, but he insisted that speaking alone was the only way to prove the attack had not defined him. The young prince needed his grandfather to hear his own voice, not another carefully protected version of it. Charles left the formal chair behind his desk and sat beside George. He moved the briefing papers out of sight, making clear that this would not be an assessment of the future heir. A briefing was simply a private lesson or report, used to prepare a royal for duty. But tonight, duty had already caused enough pain. George admitted that Camilla's words hurt, because they sounded like fears he already carried. He worried about freezing during speeches, disappointing William, and failing to become the person the country expected. The boy did not ask for sympathy. He asked whether uncertainty automatically made him weak. Charles answered with shame. The king said George should never have faced that attack. He admitted that his silence at Balmoral had allowed resentment to grow, until it reached the child he meant to protect. The monarch had avoided conflict, and avoidance had become permission. George rejected revenge. He did not want Camilla destroyed or publicly humiliated. He wanted her to understand that preparing someone for duty could never mean making that person feel worthless before those whose respect mattered most. George then asked to face her. Charles refused at first, fearing another wound, but the boy argued that silence would leave Camilla's attack as the final word between them. The king finally agreed. Camilla entered with a prepared defense, but George spoke first. He told the queen consort that he would remember what she said, yet he would not allow it to decide who he became. Her explanation collapsed. She apologized directly, without blaming pressure, confusion, or palace tension. Charles watched his grandson show restraint, courage, and empathy, the very qualities Camilla had questioned. George had achieved what royal authority could not, but outside Windsor, the story was already spreading, and the monarchy now had to face a public that had chosen sides before the palace could control the damage. The palace tried to contain the confrontation behind Windsor's stone walls, but one image made secrecy impossible. By morning, Britain saw Charles standing over the royal table, his hand raised in fury, while George sat pale beside Catherine. Camilla appeared isolated at the opposite end of the frame. The photograph did not capture her words, yet it captured their consequence, and within hours, a private family rupture became a national argument about power, childhood, and the future of the crown. An attendee confirmed the dispute through a documented account given to a senior newspaper editor. Palace officials answered with a brief statement saying only that a private family discussion had ended early. That silence mattered, because the monarchy depends on controlled messages, and every missing detail allowed public suspicion to grow. Commentators focused on Charles's anger and Catherine's protective reaction. The future heir, meaning the child expected to inherit the throne after his father, had become the center of a debate he never chose. William understood that any attempt to deny the pain could make George appear weak or confused. A London newspaper broke the restraint before sunrise. Its front page carried the Windsor photograph beneath the headline, "The King's Line in the Sand." Charles stood over the table, George remained seated in shock, and Camilla turned away. Television presenters held up copies outside their studios as the story spread. Crowds gathered near Windsor Castle by midday. Someone placed a handwritten card among the flowers for George. "You do not have to be fearless to be worthy." The message was photographed, shared across Britain, and repeated by people who saw a child being judged for having ordinary fears. William studied the card on his phone. The prince softened for the first time since the attack, yet he worried that his son's private anxiety was becoming a national symbol beyond George's control. Public support could comfort him, but it could also trap him inside the worst moment of his life. Camilla watched a broadcaster describe the attack as adult power used against a child. The Queen Consort switched off the television when the discussion turned to whether she deserved access to royal decisions. Charles rejected advice to question the severity of the confrontation. The king insisted that protecting the institution could never require doubting his grandson. The palace then confirmed that inappropriate comments had been made, and that George's education remained under his parents and the sovereign. Charles summoned William, Catherine, George, Camilla, and Anne back to Windsor. No advisor would soften the verdict, and no loyalty would be allowed to outrank accountability. The world had witnessed the fracture. Now the monarch would decide what survived it. They returned to the chamber where the crisis began, but no one took the same seat. George stood beside William. Catherine remained close without shielding him. Camilla entered without advisors, and Charles waited at the head of the table with no folder before him. The king had already shouted, punished, and restricted. Now he faced the harder task, naming what had gone wrong, deciding what could be repaired, and ensuring royal pride would never again be defended at a child's expense. Charles kept the gathering small. George, William, Catherine, Camilla, and Anne were the only people present. No courtier could turn the reckoning into another contest between royal households, meaning the separate teams serving royals. This judgment belonged to the family that caused the wound. Charles confirmed that Camilla would not return to meetings about George's constitutional preparation, the program teaching a future monarch to carry duty and work with government. Her apology mattered, but it could not erase her misuse of access or the effort to circulate the assessment. The king named the wrongdoing plainly. George had been humiliated to advance an adult struggle for influence. Cruelty, he said, did not become wisdom simply because someone called it honesty or concern for the crown. Camilla stood and faced William and Catherine. She apologized for attacking their parenting through their son. Then the Queen Consort turned to George and admitted that she had used his uncertainty because she feared becoming irrelevant. George accepted the apology without pretending the damage had vanished. He told her trust would return slowly. The young prince offered no revenge and no easy forgiveness. He gave her a boundary. Charles established the new order. William and Catherine would direct George's preparation, supported by the monarch and approved constitutional advisors. No family member could privately judge or alter that program without parental agreement. Anne placed the memorandum on the table. The memorandum reduced George to weaknesses and carried the weight of what had gone wrong. Charles fed its pages into the fire one section at a time. Camilla kept her ceremonial position beside him, but her influence over the next generation ended. The marriage survived. The boundary did not move. The monarchy left that chamber wounded but clearer. Charles had chosen protection over avoidance. Camilla had accepted consequence. William and Catherine retained authority over their son. George walked away defined not by the insult, but by the restraint, courage, and moral strength with which he answered it. The crown learned that its future rested on protection, accountability, and trust. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.